when you think about the genocide that goes on in Africa, all of the chaos that goes on in Africa, we always think it's either France or America, right? But what if I tell you that the UAE has played more role on destabilizing Africa than France and America is doing right now? The UAE is one of the reasons why Sudan is going through what they're going through right now. The UAE also plays a big role in what Congo is going through right now. They play a big role in what Somali went through, still going through. They play a big role. The UAE is the one who's funding these militant groups in Sudan right now. They're the one putting money, sending gun behind so they can murder these people and bury them in mass graves. The UAE is the one who's paying these militant group to murder the people. In Sudan right now, there's 15,000 people that lost their life in Sudan. There's 10 million that's displaced in Sudan. And all of that is because UAE needs their goal. They need their goal. This is what it's all about. It's all about money and goal. This is why they offered to build those 200 mosques in Burkina Faso. 200 mosques, not school, not hospital, not roads, not food, not water. Mosque, 200 mosques in Burkina Faso. And Ibrahim Traoré said no. That should show you what kind of people and what kind of future they see for Africa. They don't want Africa to rise up. So while we're here busy thinking it's America alone that's benefit from Africa's lack, and France benefit from Africa's lack, these colonizers, the UAE also is benefiting big from Africa's lack. They're some of the biggest beneficiaries from Africa's lack, from the murder, the bloodshed in Africa. The UAE, these Arabs, they benefit a lot from Africa's bloodshed.
Boycott the UAE, free Sudan, and free the entire African continent from these agribusiness investors from the UAE. According to an article by grain.org that is titled From Land to Logistics, UAE's growing power in the global food system, you will see how this country is grabbing large tracts of land throughout the continent to use it to grow food for export, making deals with African governments, controlling African ports. A port of a country is basically the country's front door. So these Emirati firms have signed deals with African governments to control their ports for 30 years. In Uganda, according to this article, the government of Uganda is reportedly taking advantage of the war in Sudan to become a new hub for UAE investment. It goes on to say that the government recently gave the UAE majority rights over Uganda's information and communication technology backbone, which should raise concerns about national security. And then you go to Tanzania, where the violent expulsion of 70,000 Maasai to make way for a game reserve for UAE royals, to make a playground for UAE royals on Maasai land. This is ongoing. So the government has now signed, the government of Tanzania now signed a deal with DP World, an Emirati firm, giving it the rights to upgrade and exclusively operate Dar es Salaam port for 30 years. This raised enormous opposition from civil society, political parties, and even the courts for unfairly benefiting the UAE and trampling national sovereignty. And then you have in Kenya, the UAE and Kenya just signed a free trade deal. And now ADQ has committed to invest up to $500 million there, including in food production. In Zambia, the UAE and other Gulf investors are looking at acquiring farmland to produce grains, sugar, beans, and seeds, as well as dairy and goat farming. In Zimbabwe, UAE companies are producing tobacco, macadamia nuts, bananas, avocados, citrus, and berries for export, with further expansion contingent on gaining access to more farmland. Is it that our African farmers are incapable? What's going on here? Like, this is the scam of carbon credits. Let's discuss, let's talk about this, because it is all sort of flying under the radar, but it is extremely important. Boycott the UAE, reject everything these people offer.
Is UAE taking over Africa? UAE has become the biggest investors in Africa. Since 2019, they have invested, they have made deals worth $110 billion. They have even surpassed China and also USA in 2022 and also the year 2023. They made deals worth $97 billion. This is 3 times of what China has done. And also USA, they made deals worth $10 billion. What surprised me is that African leaders, they are giving large pieces of land for agricultural purposes, as if there is no farmers in Africa, as if they cannot give these lands to African farmers so that they can do what UAE is expected to do. So UAE is going to plant macadamia, avocado, beans, cereals in these lands, and also they are going to export it after. The countries like Kenya, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, they are the one who are doing this. They are the one who are giving lands to UAE so that they can do their agricultural work. They also made a deal with Egypt to build a brand new city in Mediterranean coast. This deal is worth $35 billion. And also they made a deal also with Ghana to build an innovation hub. This deal is worth $1 billion. And also they have a deal with Zambia. They are going to take over Zambia mine, 50% of it. This deal is worth $1 billion.
Do you know that the United Arab Emirates, UAE, is now making deals with African leaders and buying up lands to farm food products for exports? This move is only going to benefit the UAE. They are coming into Africa and buying up our lands. Our leaders are not even consulting us, the citizens of these countries, before selling this land or leasing it out to them. Our indigenous African citizens are just cheap labor, working their butt off on their fields. At the end of the day, the UAE get to enjoy this profit, and the citizens remain in a state of suffering. This thing must end. We cannot be working for another person to eat. Citizens of indigenous African countries that are experiencing this already, because a lot of African countries are already experiencing this. And if you are not careful, your country might be among. We, the citizens, must push for stronger land right laws and build community land trust and cooperative and develop African-owned agri-businesses. We cannot keep complaining that they are taking everything away from us. What are we doing about it? This is what we need to do about it. We need to start doing something about it. Our leaders will continue to sell us out. They don't care. They are benefiting from the deals. So they will not stop. And they have the power to continue. This our nonchalancy as citizens will not stop it. It's only action that will stop it from continuing. They have the money to engage in this kind of deals with our leader. Does not mean we'll keep quiet. We have a voice. If they have money, we have a voice. Let's use it. Follow my backup page. I already tagged it in the description.
I don't know how we can reverse this mess, but let me tell you something. Land grabbing is well alive in 2024. Guess who just bought 20% of Zimbabwe's land, 10% of Liberia, 10% of Zambia, and 8% of Tanzania? And by the way, collectively, that's like the size of the UK, or at least half of France. Meet Sheikh Ahmed Dalmouk Al Maktoum, who is a young member of the Dubai royal family, who probably doesn't know the language being spoken in those countries, runs an organization called Blue Carbon that's out here snatching lands in Africa for however long they need it in order for UAE to fulfill its Paris Agreement. I know you're probably thinking, what do UAE fulfilling its Paris Agreement have to do with us? I'll tell you how you got dragged into it. Now, according to the Paris Agreement in 2015, countries are responsible to bring down their carbon emission because it's causing an overall rise in global temperature, which is very fascinating because according to this 2022 chart, you can kind of see Africa producing the least amount of carbon emission, which kind of makes sense since Africa is like a poor continent. We're not producing anything. And you can see Asia, where UAE lies, is on the rise. So why did we roll up to the Paris Agreement? Because we're not doing the most? Now let's go back to why Africa's involved. Now, first of all, let me get this clear. UAE is going to do nothing to change its production model to lower emission, all right? Because clearly that's going to affect their profit margin. And look at UAE right now, how beautiful it is, and their economy is booming. You guys go there for vacation. Yeah, they're not going to tamper with that. So that's when we have carbon offsetting, what they call carbon trading, which basically states that countries that have high carbon emission, by the way, guys, this whole climate change talk, but this is the kind of games they want to play. Anyways, countries that have high carbon emission could go ahead and fund projects or protected forests because, you know, it absorbs greenhouse gases, and somehow that's going to count as carbon credit contribution for their Paris Agreement. Even though they didn't change anything, they're still emitting the same amount, or if not more. So how does that work? Now, we're probably going to hear from some fellow Africans telling us that's a business deal right there. Tell me, when on God's green earth have you ever seen a rich African buying lands 10% in Arabia? Do you think they're going to allow that? No. And I'm telling you this one, UAE probably can deal with this carbon emissions by itself, but no. Because deep down inside, you're going to have things like this be done in the dark, right? UAE has set its sight on Africa's critical minerals. So do you think it was always about climate change? Yes, and I'm fully aware that the other picture is another royal family. At the end of the day, guys, they all work with each other, so calm down. Now, this article I thought was very fascinating, and it tells you about previously deals that have fell through like they always do, because you can clearly see how our continent looked like. It states that the money does not usually go directly to the community which is involved in the preservation of the forest. Usually the government just takes the money and they do what they think the community needs. And I'm going to leave you guys with this important point over here. This has been the case for multiple other deals, which the government makes behind closed doors, and it's never actually put up for deliberation or any forms of democracy process, like the case of many other countries.
Welcome back to Gist Line. We've heard what these people have to say, and it seems Africa has become the new gold mine for many foreign powers. And one country that is making serious moves is the UAE. From East Africa to West Africa, reports are emerging that the UAE is buying up massive amounts of land for farming, mining, and business ventures. But the question is, at what cost to Africans? And they're even saying some African leaders are even conniving with these people. Many African governments struggling with debt and unemployment are welcoming these deals because they promise investments, jobs, and infrastructure. On the surface, it looks like a win situation, but when you look deeper, things aren't so simple. Critics say this is nothing but modern-day land grabbing. Huge chunks of African land are being leased or sold off to foreign investors, often for decades, while local communities are displaced or pushed to the margins. Farmers lose their lands, traditional livelihoods disappear, and the promised benefits rarely reach the people on the ground. The UAE in particular is interested in Africa's fertile farmland. With limited arable land back home, they are securing African soil to grow food for their own population, while Africans themselves continue to face food insecurity. It's a sharp irony. African land feeding foreign nations while local citizens struggle to eat. And it's not just farming. The UAE is also expanding influence in ports, mining, and real estate, gaining both economic and strategic control. This has raised fears that Africa is being recolonized, not with guns and chains, but with money, contracts, and political pressure. Of course, some leaders defend these deals, saying foreign investment is necessary for development, blah, blah, blah. But the real question remains, who truly benefits? Is it Africans or these foreign powers? This situation is a wake-up call. If African leaders don't negotiate fair terms and protect the interests of their people, Africa might end up losing its most valuable resources, which is the land. Now let's listen and see the evaluation that David Hinde did, and you let me know what you think in the comment section, and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
You probably haven't heard about it, but there's a new scramble for Africa. The UAE, one of the smallest and richest countries in the Middle East, is buying up to 20% of Zimbabwe's forests, 10% of Liberia's, 10% of Zambia's, 8% of Tanzania's, and an unknown amount of Kenya's forests as well. All in all, 25 million hectares of land, the size of the UK. It seems less like a scramble and more like a takeover. But let's start with who and why this is going on. These deals are being signed by the one-year-old UAE-based company Blue Carbon, under the leadership of a young member of Dubai's ruling family, Ahmed Delmouk Al Maktoum. The Emirates, which recently hosted COP28, says these deals are there to, quote, help climate action. You know, saving the world and that. The young sheikh, of course, has no prior experience in climate projects, but I'm sure he's an expert though. Now, to put it simply, under the Paris Climate Agreement, countries have pledged to go net zero. And a country or company that wants to offset its pollution can invest in green projects like forests, giving it so-called carbon credits. And there's no better place than Africa, home to crucial wildlife havens and biodiversity hotspots. And so, the newly purchased large swaths of land represent billions of dollars in potential offsetting revenue for the Emirates. So, we ticked off profit. Now, let's go to power and PR. The UAE is the world's 7th largest oil producer and has the 3rd biggest plans for oil and gas expansion behind its neighbors Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So it's fair to say they aren't exactly going green. And what better way to greenwash your image as a polluter than buying large swaths of African forests, ones that you can use to buy carbon credits but also sell to your polluting friends? MashaAllah! Worst of all, Africa is losing here again. It's responsible for just 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and yet suffers disproportionately from climate change. Western polluters love making broken promises and don't pay up for the damage they cause. And now African governments have given them a way to effectively whitewash their problem. And who pays? Well, as usual, the people. Take Liberia, for example. Under the deal, it gives away 1 million hectares over 30 years, while the UAE's blue carbon gets 70% of the credit sales. According to NGO Fern, over 1 million people depend on the land to live, and their rights have been simply violated and sold off to a foreign country. And so, brothers and sisters, my question is simple.
Got going on right now because of disrespect to the Black American community. This is about the survival of Black Americans. We're in a competition. Africans and Latinos are fighting Black Americans for resources.
So yeah, apparently this is a thing that has been happening over the past week. A group of African Americans calling themselves the Foundational Black Americans and American Descendants of Slavery apparently decided that it would be a great idea to stage an economic boycott of businesses owned by African immigrants in the United States. The context here is that a boycott is one of the most potent economic and political statements that it's possible to make. For example, it was a global boycott that brought down South Africa's apartheid regime. And it is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel that has led to some very panicked and interesting responses from the White House. Basically, a boycott is a geopolitical tool that is usually reserved for the very worst of the worst. So how the hell do small businesses owned by African immigrants in the US qualify for a boycott by anyone? Least of all by those who share the closest cultural and genetic ties with them, who live in the same neighborhoods with them, and with whom they have intermarried so much that in many cases it is no longer functionally possible to distinguish them from each other. The answer is, they don't. What you're actually witnessing is a US secret intelligence operation. As always, you don't have to take my word for it, because the US government itself has done an excellent job of documenting exactly what is happening and why. What you're looking at is a document called Memorandum 46, a confidential memo presented by former US National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski under President Jimmy Carter on March 17, 1978. Yes, Jimmy Carter, nice guy, Nobel Peace Prize winner, him. So the context behind this document was that at the time, America's racist, hostile, imperial foreign policy towards South Africa, which offered full support to the apartheid regime, had gained attention in America and had become a big political issue among African Americans. Just a decade before that, the US had also suffered great international embarrassment at the UN because of this very issue. The US government feared that political collaboration between black people in Africa and black people in the US would lead to the re-emergence of Pan-African ideals and potentially collective action by the African voting bloc, which made up 1/3 of the UN. It also apparently feared that this political collaboration would refocus black American attention onto Israeli apartheid in Palestine, and black people would naturally side with the Palestinians over the Israeli settler colonists. All of this might apparently force a change in US foreign policy towards South Africa and toward Africa as a whole, which according to Brzezinski was a no-go area. US imperial policy toward Africa, according to this document, could not be allowed to change under any circumstances, because the status quo of black Africa is, I quote, important for US political, economic, and military interests. His words, not mine. As a result, Brzezinski's memo stated that, quote, appropriate steps need to be taken inside and outside the country in order to inhibit any pressure by radical African leaders and organizations on the US black community for the latter to exert influence on the policy of the administration toward Africa. In other words,
oh, can't be having any of that now, can we?
So what were these appropriate steps? I'll just read them out without adding or subtracting anything. This is the highest level of the US government in its own words. Bear in mind, this is a publicly available document which you can Google and read for yourself. Specific steps should be taken with the help of appropriate government agencies to inhibit coordinated activity of the black movement in the United States. Special clandestine operations should be launched by the CIA to cause division among black African radical national groups and their leaders. To elaborate and bring into effect a special program designed to perpetuate division in the black movement and neutralize the most active groups of the leftist radical organizations representing different social strata of the black community, to encourage division in black circles, to preserve the present climate which inhibits the emergence from within the black leadership of a person capable of exerting nationwide appeal. Now take special note of the next two. To work out and realize preventive operations in order to impede durable ties between US black organizations and radical groups in African states. to support actions designed to sharpen social stratification in the black community, which would lead to the widening and perpetuation of the gap between successful educated blacks and the poor, giving rise to growing antagonism between different black groups and a weakening of the movement as a whole. Now, does any of this sound strangely familiar to you? Has American foreign policy in Africa recently become a political issue among African Americans? Maybe an issue so big that it led to protests and the unprecedented spectacle of a U.S. African commander bumbling and stumbling over himself on Kenyan TV. Has the U.S. government recently suffered great international embarrassment over racial discrimination in the U.S. and its support for foreign apartheid regimes? Has the Palestinian issue increasingly become a front-burner topic both in Africa and in the African American community? Is an African country leading the genocide case against Israel at the ICJ? Are African countries asserting their sovereign right to not support Israel? Are African American activists leading aid expeditions to Gaza, creating negative publicity for Uncle Sam's Middle Eastern love child? Is there increasing political awareness on both sides of the Atlantic that Africans struggling with artificial deindustrialization and non-representative leaders who don't answer to them, and African Americans struggling with systemic poverty, discrimination, and exclusion from the American economy share the same ultimate imperial enemy? And if, as it was in 1978, the answer to all these questions is yes, then what preventive measures and actions could the CIA be taking to impede durable ties between U.S. black organizations and radical groups in African states, and to sharpen social stratification in the black community, giving rise to growing antagonism between different black groups and a weakening of the movement as a whole? Sometimes